This is a very interesting topic, and of course, in light of your vast experience, I mean, we're glad to have you here so we could ask all the questions that I'm sure a lot of the investors want to know as well. This is something, capital stack is something I really get into with the investors because they want to understand what they're investing in. So you had mentioned that including EB-5 in the capital stack can induce institutional lenders to lend. I was wondering how institutional lenders react to the use of EB-5 in a capital stack, and how you could use EB-5 to maximize benefits to developers and acceptability to lenders as well.
Well, it's a great question, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a complicated answer because there's different views on this. Uh, the, the, the basic issue is that on the one hand, lenders like subordinated capital because it enables them to essentially give a lower loan to value on a project. So developers are always under tremendous pressure to limit their own equity. Equity is always hard to raise in the current environment. Most equity is provided by third-party sources rather than by the developers themselves. So what the developers need to do is limit that equity. It's a cost to them. And at the same time, the banks want to have a lot of subordinated capital in because they don't want to be the primary at risk holders. So there's always been a dynamic as to how much loan to value there would be. At certain times, banks would loan as much as 80 or 90% of the capital, and then particularly after the 2008 recession, those numbers crept back considerably. So on the one hand, banks welcome, having a lot of money behind them. On the other hand, there's been some concern about having EB-5 investors having a role in the project, and which is why a lot of the banks will no longer allow EB-5 to take a real estate position. So the real estate position means that ideally investors would like to get at least a mezzanine loan position where they have some legal rights if the project goes under. On the other hand, that requires an intercreditor agreement with the first lender, and most first lenders are reluctant to do that. I'm not saying that they all are like that, but in my experience, more times than not, the lender will not allow an EB-5 investment group to take a mezzanine position, and therefore EB-5 has usually come in as pref equity, which means that it's structured like a loan because we call it equity, but it's not really an equity position. The investor doesn't really have any stake in the operation. The investor is basically getting a limited interest return on it, subordinated to capital that's in front of it. The capital that's in front of the investor certainly is going to be a first mortgage. It could also be a mezzanine loan from another lender. It could be a mezzanine loan from a government source, and then the only priority that the EB-5 investor gets is over any government grant capital or any government loans that can come in as a third position, and the equity of the equity investors. So it's a mixed bag, and I think that from the standpoint, I think where we want to try to get to is a situation where the investor can get good legal protection, and to the extent that the investor is going to be at risk, maybe there's a way for the investor to get some upsides from the project. Primarily, as you all know much better than I, investors are willing to come in and not get much of a return on their capital, and they're focusing on their green card. And that should be continuing to be the primary issue. And I think that developers have to become a lot more astute about how to help that happen and navigate the difficulties of going through the whole green card process and the USCIS reviews. And I think that without having a greater transparency on that process and a greater flexibility on the part of government, I think that's going to be a real limitation in terms of attracting capital. So first and foremost, you want to try to structure rules with whatever program, whatever new life the EB-5 program is going to take, that's going to give primary attention to achieving the primary goal of the investor, which is to get their green card and to get it as soon as possible. Secondly, however, there have been a number of defaults with EB-5 projects, simply because there are defaults in the real estate industry, and particularly over the last year, where the pandemic has put a lot of developers into sad shape. It's also had an impact on EB-5, which tends to be very low in the capital stack, and very often when these projects are taken over by the bank, there's no capital behind them to protect the EB-5 investor. So they suffer both the loss of their investment, and because they suffer the loss of their investment and the capital is no longer at risk, they lose their opportunity for the green card. So that problem has to be addressed, and I think it has to be marketed, but basically we have to offer real substance to the investor. Well, one of my own personal predilections is to look to try to give the EB-5 investors either a better return. As you probably know, it's mostly the agents and regional centers that take the bulk of the return, and the EB-5 investor gets a tiny little piece of it, and or to give them an opportunity to convert their investment into some kind of equity investment once they've achieved their green card.